coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. I'm Laura.
And I'm Kate. Last week, we kicked off our coverage of cheating on the show with a general discussion of monogamy and infidelity in the real world and in our fiction, as well as some talk about Richard and Penel and Lot and Paris and Asher. Go back and watch that if you haven't already. It was such a fun conversation, and it really sets the stage for a lot of our feelings about this topic that we'll continue to explore over the next few weeks. This week, we're diving ever deeper into the more complicated and nuanced situations that come up. Was Chris cheating on Sherry with Lorelai at the end of season 2? Was Lorelai cheating on Luke at the end of season 6? What about Nicole and when she's clearly cheating on Luke in season 4?
All spicy meatballs. We'll get to all of them. And they're just all fascinating questions that I really am excited to get to. But before we dive into all of that, I am contractually obligated to remind you that this is a spoilers all podcast. So if you have not seen the show and you don't want to know what happens, now is a good time to bow out and go watch and then come back and see this episode. And if you could quickly do all of those YouTube things for us, please like this video, share it, subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment. It really does help us out, and we're always grateful for the support.
We really are. All right, let's get right into this. Let's start with Nicole and Luke, because I think, again, it's one of the more clear-cut ones, and so it should be one of the easier ones to talk about. Obviously it starts off with Luke being in a foul mood and Lorelai being like, "What's up with you?" And he's like, "I'm not wearing my socks." Some other dude has forgotten or left his socks at the apartment or townhouse that Nicole shares with Luke. Ouch.
Yeah. It's very in Luke's face. So of course he's going to react in the way that he does. There's no gray area there. The cheating is happening. It is ongoing.
They are married.
Yeah. Luke responds in a very jealous way that I think is also unhealthy in a lot of ways, but it's understandable too. I mean, that's your wife, and this is just being thrown right in your face. Should we or could we have expected Luke to react any differently? I feel like it's, again, not a healthy response and nothing that is, to be condoned, especially when he starts trying to, destroy physical property and kick this dude's car. But I also kind of get it.
Yeah. There's always this desire to want to know, and it's not always the best thing for us. But just as humans, we're like, I have to know what's going on here. And so, of course, he says to Lorelai, like, Nicole was big on her plans. I wanted to see what was up. I told her I was going to be at the diner, but I ended up coming here and waiting for them. And I saw them get out of the car and everything, like I was right about this. So he engages in this sort of like covert surveillance to catch her in the act. And, a lot of cheating doesn't necessarily come to light in that particular way. But for Luke, it does. He has obviously the suspicion from the fact that he only ever wears one kind of socks, and he can tell just being like, those aren't my socks. And unfortunately, his suspicions are proved correct. It's not just Nicole buying new socks. So that was hard for him to process, obviously. And of course, we've discussed this in the past, but just that sort of like the fact that the only emotion that's socially validated for men to express, especially when something like this happens to them, is anger. It's resentment. It's they're more angry about the embarrassment than they are about the emotional impact. They're not allowed to be sad or jealous or any of those other emotions that are typically reserved to the sphere of women for some unknown effing reason. And so he goes straight to anger and violence. He says, I lost something, or I lost it. I had to do something. And he beats up a guy's car and ends up in jail for, destruction of property. It's just,
yeah, it's
not the way to handle it.
Yeah, but I don't even, I think a part of it, does stem from like, the gender perspective and Luke, being a guy. But I think it was just also his personality as well, where like that is how Luke Danes was going to react. He was going to be mad. He was not going to be able to, really come to terms with all of the emotions that he probably was feeling. And so anger was just going to come to the forefront with him. And because I think he couldn't handle all of those emotions, that's where the outlet just became, I don't know what to do with how I'm feeling. So I'm just going to, again, kick this guy's car because this is all the only way I know how to express it right now.
Yeah. I love when he and Lorelai are standing out on the sidewalk and he's like, they're still in there. I know what they're doing. But even if you took one of those pills that they were hawking at the Super Bowl, they would have been done in 4 or 5 hours tops. I mean, that commercial said it all. If you're still active after 4 hours, you should call a damn doctor. And I find that delightful because the Super Bowl is this Sunday. So shout outs.
Yeah. Would have been nice to have seen the Bills there, but
still hurts, guys. It still hurts.
Yeah, still reeling.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think the end result was just Luke Danes is not someone who is in touch with his feelings and his emotions. He certainly makes attempts to get there over the course of the show with the self-help books and, the love guru books and the tapes that he listens to.
After this.
And he does have growth in that regard. But at that moment in time, this is, I think, the only way that he knew how to respond.
And it's sad.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question for you about this.
Okay.
Why do you think this happened? And would you say that Nicole is quote unquote a villain? What role, if any, did Luke play in all of this?
I wouldn't peg Nicole to be a villain. She was definitely cold, unnecessarily, I think, at times when maybe a little bit of warmth within the relationship. And I feel like this is going to come up a lot, just like better communication could have potentially turned things around for them, even if they never made it, long term and had their marriage go the distance. But at least they could have tried to like course correct and solve some things as opposed to just being cold and distant and throwing in the towel. So no, I wouldn't say that Nicole was the villain. I think they were both to blame here. You both could have done better. You both could have made more effort to really understand why this person is feeling like, again, their needs are not being met, which is very clearly the case here. I think Luke probably tried a little bit more than Nicole did. And I think Nicole was just, when she was ready to give up, she was just ready to give up. And that's why she moved on in the way that she did. And, went with this other guy because she was just done, even if Luke was not ready to be.
Yeah. I mean, I could see how Luke might have contributed in his distance. Like, he's not the most lovey-dovey, all up in your face person all the time. And, I think it was clear to most of the watchers that maybe this wasn't a correct pairing in terms of like, they're not maybe as compatible as they should be for a couple in a marriage. And we see that with Luke's reticence to actually take meaningful steps forward in their relationship. They get married on a whim and then almost immediately want to get divorced. And then they're like, actually, let's try to work this out a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then that's not going well either. They move in together, but Luke still spends the predominant chunk of his time at the diner in Stars Hollow. Like, Lorelai calls him out on it. Like, you don't live in Litchfield. You live here. That is Nicole's house, not your house. And so, like, well, technically, legally, it's half his house regardless. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure if Connecticut is a 50-50 state or not, but regardless, either way, like, legally, yeah, it's his house. But it leads to all of these fights, and it's not a relationship that we get a lot of insight into. Like, we see them fighting in, I think it's The Reigning Lorelai. They're out on a park bench and Kirk is trying to read their lips. We don't even know what they're fighting about. Like, it's obviously done that way to give us Lorelai's perspective. Lorelai doesn't know what they're fighting about, and so we can't be privy to it. And if we knew, it might take some of the the mystique out of it. But like we see them actively fighting and Luke running away from it. He's really not contending with the deeper problems in their relationship. And this feeds into the symptom theory of affairs. Thanks, Esther, for teaching me this one. The theory goes as follows. An affair simply alerts us to a pre-existing condition, either a troubled relationship or a troubled person. And in many cases, this holds true. Plenty of relationships culminate in an affair to compensate for a lack, to fill a void, or to set up an exit. Insecure attachment, conflict avoidance, prolonged lack of sex, loneliness, or just years of being stuck rehashing the same old arguments. Many adulterers are motivated by marital dysfunction. So it's one of the common ways that we talk about affairs, in that like we assume that there's something wrong with the person or something wrong with the relationship. There's some fundamental deficiency and it has to be rectified by going elsewhere for need fulfillment. And again, in some cases it is very true, and I think this is one of them. But I guess the other big question is, was Nicole wrong to go out there and get these needs met by some random guy who we don't know anything else about, like before they were officially broken up? Do you think it was just her looking for an out? Do you think it was her trying to be cruel and vindictive, or like to get back at Luke for, because like how did those socks get in the drawer for Luke to find? Was she just careless, or did she leave them there being like, I want him to see, I want him to know that I'm with someone else because he's neglecting me and he's not dealing with this, and the only way I can think of to like get a guy like Luke to actually take any action on something is to have a big blow up like this. And I mean, I'll just kick in my 2 cents and be like, that's not healthy. Like, just tell him it's over. But like, what do you think about her doing this while they're still legally married, before things have like officially ended for them? Because Luke seems to still be in this.
Yeah. I mean, holy moly. Like, if that's why she was doing it, just to like try and shove it in his face, like that's a really toxic level of manipulation. If you need this marriage to dissolve, yep, got it.
Red flag time, y'all. If you're listening audio only, we are waving the red flags.
Yep. Shame on you, Nicole. And I don't know if like, we're not really here to pass judgment, but I would pass judgment on her for like just being really a horrendous person within that marriage if she was just doing it at that point and trying to throw it in Luke's face in that way. We all know that Luke Danes is not, rolling high on perception checks a lot of the time. That's just who he is. You need to spell it out to the man. Like, and you need to know that about your partner to know that he is going to need it spelled out for him. So if you really feel like this marriage is over and you're ready for it to be done, don't get passive aggressive with the socks in the drawer. Tell your husband.
Yeah, wisdom is Luke's dump stat. Let's be real. But yeah, I really hope it's not that, and that it's just maybe something she thought she could get away with. Either way, maybe not the best, especially since they clearly haven't had an official, like, for the level of relationship that they have, like, I don't think it's necessary for them to be fully divorced before they can move on, because like, especially when you're legally married, it can take a long time, depending on the complexity of your relationship, your finances, your shared property, any custody arrangements that might be required for children. Not case here, but the other stuff. You can sort of be held hostage by the state in your relationship for a really long time. Like, you can be emotionally moved on and practically moved on in every other way, but legally you still have to deal with your ex for quite some time. And so I don't think it's necessary to always like wait until you've signed on the dotted line to actually move on. But in this case, it seems like Luke was none the wiser about this, and that she was specifically doing it behind his back before they had the official, hey, we're getting a divorce discussion. Luke is under the impression that they're still in a relationship, and there was nothing that, or we didn't see it, and it seems like there was nothing that approximated a breakup. So, I mean, you know, she kind of walks away from a fight like whatever, but that's about it. That is the last we see of it. So I'm guessing it's just her, you know, trying to forget about it, trying to take some power back for herself, maybe even. There might be a little bit of like revenge in her heart, but that doesn't mean that it's meant for Luke's discovery to hurt him. So
Yeah, I agree. And I'll just, end by saying that I concur that, you don't need to wait for the legal bit to be fully dissolved, considering how long it can take. Again, my grievance with her is that there was zero communication and she didn't just tell him.
yeah.
Could have absolved him of a lot of pain.
Yeah, like Nicole seems like someone who is more emotionally mature and intelligent. And so the fact that she can't just have this conversation with Luke where she says, this isn't working, I want out, it's just like, why? And so, I think it's a writer thing. I think it's played for drama. It's played for the, Lorelai picking Luke up from the cop shop because he's discovered Nicole's secret lover. Like, I think that's all they wanted. And they didn't hold true to the fact that Nicole seems to be someone who actually has her head screwed on straight. And I mean, granted, there are plenty of intelligent, sane people who engage in affairs, but that doesn't mean it's a thing that we should be propping up or excusing or glossing over in our fiction, because it doesn't teach us the way to contextualize that for ourselves. It's just for our own sake of petty drama. And it can serve a purpose in fiction to demonstrate certain things about relationships and human nature, but in this case I think it was just kind of cheap.
Yep, I agree.
All right, let's move on. My next question for you is, in the season 2 finale, we have Chris's return to town. Lorelai ends up inviting him to Suki's wedding. They end up getting together. He admits that he and Sherry are taking time apart to think about the future of their relationship, or whether there's going to be a future of their relationship. And he says he's thinking about getting an apartment. But, she's still away, that he hasn't seemingly spoken to her for at least a couple of days, maybe. And, he makes this confession to her that they're not working out, that this just isn't it for him. And then they end up sleeping together the night before Suki's wedding, and they want to get together. Is that cheating? Do you consider that to be cheating?
I'm going to say no here. Because from what we can see and what we can tell, there was a mutual agreement to take time apart to figure out if they were going to want to come back to one another. And it kind of makes me think of something we said in the part 1 of cheating, where it's like, you don't own this person. They are on loaner. And so right now you have both amicably decided that you're being loaned out to other people, potentially because you need to figure it out what it is you want. So no, I would say no here. I think, again, because there was that mutuality to it where they both had understood, we are going to take time apart. It's an agreed upon decision. They didn't put any constraints on one another, as if to say, hey, while we're taking this time apart, let's also both agree that we're not going to sleep with other people. That wasn't something that we ever saw or was expressly said. So I would say no. And Sherry too, I think she would have been well within her right to, had she wanted to, get with another man at that point in time. My answer would still be the same. I would not consider this to be cheating.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on this. I think it goes to the question of, again, what constitutes the end of a relationship? And, most relationships I've ever been in have been a unilateral decision to exit. Either I've made the choice that I am no longer emotionally invested in this, and I just need to find my out and have that conversation, or I've been not ready to let a relationship go, but the guy has been ready and is like, I'm sorry, I don't want this with you, at least not right now, right? So in my experience, it's very often a one-sided thing, and I think it only takes one person to end a relationship. You should communicate it, but in this case, like you said, they're on loan and they have an option to renew, and Christopher does not want to renew. And so the question becomes that gray area of, well, I haven't had this conversation yet. Does that mean that I'm cheating if I intend to go forward with ending this relationship? And I think maybe each situation's a little bit different. In this case, yeah, I agree with you that they had agreed to take some time apart. And, you know, in the words of Ross Geller, we were on a break.
That's a very different story, and I would have a very different answer here, but we are not doing a Friends crossover, at least not today, folks.
As of right now, not on the books. But yeah, just the explicit act of saying, you know, we're on the precipice here of ending this relationship potentially. We really need to think about what we want. And if Chris is like, I don't want this anymore, it's his prerogative to conduct himself accordingly. I mean, would I prefer that he ended things with Sherry before he, like, kind of, you know, like what Jess does with Shane, you know, before he professes his love and kisses Rory, he at least goes off and ends things with Shane. But that's a far less serious relationship. And so there's conflicting evidence on whether or not Chris and Sherry were engaged at that point in time. You know, Rory says it to Lorelai later. It was like, well, Dad was engaged. But then in season 3, episode 1, when Lorelai is trying to reconcile with Luke and she goes to the diner as Mimi, she says Chris is going to have a baby with his girlfriend. So, like, are they engaged or not? I don't know. Like, how serious is this relationship? And I think if you're in an engagement where you have to take time to think about it, probably not actually going to be able to repair that relationship. I think a lot of the time, not necessarily always, but a lot of the time, if you're in that position, there are some fundamental problems in your relationship that may not be reconcilable. So, you know, were it not for the baby, they probably wouldn't have gotten back together. And we see that ultimately that relationship does not work out. And so they might have been better off not going forward with it in the first place and maybe finding some other way to co-parent Gigi. But obviously the show had to keep Lorelai and Chris apart because that's just how they roll. They hate Chris. Like, they don't want that relationship ultimately. It's all about Lorelai and Luke. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. We're like, I don't think it's really cheating. I also kind of think maybe it was a little underhanded for Rory to throw it in Lorelai's face after she's very explicitly slept with a married man.
Yeah, and I think Lorelai's response there too was just, again, very telling. I will, you know, stand by all day that she was right to call Rory out on her BS in that moment, because that was something really egregious that I think Rory did. But Lorelai had a great comeback where she was like, first off, entirely different scenario, which it is. But for her to also say, like, oh, you cannot peg that on me. You can't say, like, I made one slightly poor choice or one slightly poor decision, and so that's why it excuses you from your behavior. And just like, I'm the bad mom who set a poor example, so you can be blameless because, like, I should have just done better and set a better example for you. That was just Rory trying to, once again, holier than thou. I'm on this pedestal. I didn't do anything wrong. And if I made this mistake, it was because my mother set a bad example for me. No, Rory, you're 19 at this point. Grow up, own up to this very, you know, detrimental mistake that you've just made with Dean, and just grow a pair and just own up to your ish sometimes. But of course, it's Rory Gilmore, so she can't do it.
Yeah. It is a different situation, and it gets into that splitting hairs of like engaged versus married. You know, it's like the Jim and Pam dilemma. Mm-hmm. Michael Scott says BFD, engaged ain't married. So it's true. Like, an engagement is far easier to exit than a marriage. I mean, I may go into my philosophy on marriage in more depth in a couple of weeks, in terms of what it actually is. But most people take vows of exclusivity, you know? And so once you've crossed that legal threshold, there's this like ceremonial component that moves you from one kind of relationship to another. And and Chris and Sherry hadn't crossed that yet. And in fact, they were this close to breaking up when fate intervened and gave them a family of sorts now. And Chris even says to Lorelai, like, I missed it the first time. I never forgave myself for that. I don't know what to do here, but like, I don't want to miss it this time. I should probably go back to Sherry. And, you know, it's just one of those like unanswerable questions in life.
Mm-hmm. But I will applaud Chris for recognizing that, you know, Gigi is a factor here and she does matter. She has to, you know, making a marriage last long term for the sake of a child when it really just needs to be done is not healthy. But I will just applaud him for, at least in the short term, recognizing like, hey, this is not just about me and it's not just about Sherry. We have a child together and we need to factor in doing what is best for her at this moment in time. So I at least just want to try, because I want to try and not, you know, have what happened with Rory happen with her. And maybe we can try and make this work and do better, but I've got to give it a shot. So
Yeah.
I will applaud him in that moment for, again, realizing, like, I will still say he did not cheat, but at least in that moment, he's like, I'm going to put myself back on loner with her and try and make this work. And I'm letting you know that. And he made it very clear to Lorelai that's what he was doing. So again, there was not going to be a gray area of like, did he go back to Sherry? Did he not? Should I try and pick this back up? He said, you know, had a great weekend, but this is my decision now. And that's what it's going to be. Good on Chris.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about their relationship on the whole and their dynamic and Chris's role as, you know, divided father figure for Rory and for Gigi in a couple weeks to months' time. Those are in the imminent future, if you're interested in those topics. But the other stuff I want to talk about just briefly between the bigger topics has to do with Lorelai and Chris in season 5, because we don't really have her explicitly cheating. But if you go back to part 1 and listen to sort of some of the definitions of cheating in terms of it being people stepping outside of the contextually defined boundaries of their relationships and engaging in behaviors that kind of fall outside of agreed upon things that are okay, and hiding them from their partner. And especially that second bit, the hiding things. We have a lot in season 5 where Lorelai is having this series of interactions with Chris. It starts in You Jump, I Jump, Jack, when she goes to help him with Gigi and she figures out that Sherry has left and Chris is all alone with the baby. And then she invites him for lunch a few weeks later because she hasn't heard from him. So she reaches out and is like, hey, how are things going? And then Rory encourages her not to tell Luke about these things and kind of doesn't say anything about it or encourages her mom to not make a big deal about it. And so when Lorelai goes to tell Luke about the lunch at the inn, Luke is initially sort of like, okay. But then he goes to TJ later and is like, you know, hypothetically, if Liz had lunch with an ex, what would your reaction be? And TJ flips out. Again, male possessiveness and inability to process feelings about somebody else's autonomy. But, you know, it continues after Chris's dad dies and she goes to him with the tequila and then she doesn't tell Luke that she's hungover. Rory covers for her, says not to say anything about it, like, he doesn't need to know. And then it all blows up in her face at the wedding. So how do you feel about those omissions, shall we say, from their communication? What does that say about their relationship and her interactions with Chris? Like, is that cheating?
Slightly, yeah. I would say that, you know, not 100%, but there's some deception there. And there are some, like you said, omissions that are going to and do inevitably cause people pain. And when the end result, again, leads that receptive party to feel that way, you got to own up to the fact that you did something that you shouldn't have. Again, whether it was physical cheating, emotional cheating, an omission, or a lie, like, you know, there's can be some really fine lines there, but also a lot of overlap. I'm not going to say that Lorelai is scot-free, because she is certainly not, but horrible advice from Rory to just encourage her own mother to just be like, nope, don't tell him, shut it down, don't say anything, hide it, lie about it. And then for her to continue to cover for him, you're not helping your mother try and move forward within this relationship as well. I think it was really horrible advice for her to be giving. I wish Lorelai had not listened to it, because again, when this eventually all blows up and everything becomes known, there are hurt parties. And so that has to be acknowledged, because if for whatever reason Luke was just, had his response been different, and had he just been like, okay, well, I understand why you did that, I wish you would have told me, but I'm okay with it, you know, different story here. But when he's so devastated and hurt in the way that he ends up being, you need to acknowledge that and then recognize this behavior was not okay. And so Luke is going to perceive that as potentially, again, deception, cheating, whatever. And so when one party sees it that way, it has to be validated.
Yeah, hiding things, even quote unquote innocent things from your partner, is like a little betrayal. And in this particular instance, we know that there's a whole emotional history and sexual history for Lorelai and Chris, and Luke knows that. And of course, it's going to be a point of insecurity for him because of, again, the way we view our partners as ours, and we view their romantic and sexual history as threatening to us and our self-conception and our stability in our relationships. And it's ironic to me that Rory gave that advice after she saw what happened with Richard and Penelon and Emily, and how impacted Emily was by finding out that Richard had been lying to her for so long about interacting with a previous love interest who he was engaged to. Like, that was a serious thing. And, you know, similarly, Chris and Lorelai have been very serious in the past. They almost got together. They have a child together. They share this deep, long history. And, you know, it's so much better for everyone moving forward if Lorelai can just be honest and open about it with Luke. And we see that come in season 6, where she learns that lesson and is like, so remember that phone call we got from Chris? Like, here's the deal with it. She actually lays it all out and says, hey, I'm back in contact with Chris. This is the deal. This is what happened. Hope that's okay. You know, she's open about it. And we see in season 7, when Lorelai and Christopher are married, Chris is sharing about the letter from Sherry immediately. You know, that kind of open communication about it. Like, Lorelai was shocked. She's like, oh, I'm just like surprised that you're telling me about this now and not like hiding it from me, which just goes to show how immature some of her previous interactions with partners have been, that, you know, they can't have conversations about previous lovers because it's threatening to their partner and it's awkward. But it would have been so much better for everyone if they could just like tell the truth and just say, oh, I had lunch with Chris. Oh, I saw Chris. Like, he needed some help with something and he's an old friend. You know, it made it so much worse to hide it than it would have ever been if she told the truth. It's one of those situations where the truth does set you free, and not one of the ones where it needs to be held back for saving peace of mind, you know? Like, Luke didn't need that peace of mind. He needed the truth.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you can still reveal that truth, and in that moment there are still going to be hurt feelings. It's not like, oh, I told you the truth, so you have no right to feel what you're feeling. You should be okay with the fact that I'm open and honest about what's going on. No, it could still lead to some devastation and hurt feelings, but at least you're addressing them now in the moment, as opposed to, again, just trying to hide it like a landmine where someone is going to inevitably stumble on it and get themselves blown up later in an even more disastrous way than had you just been transparent about it first. So you can't just, and I think a lot of the times too, our Gilmore women are almost scared of their boyfriends or their husbands' reactions, because they're just like, I don't want that confrontation. I am not good at it. I will run away from it like the plague. And that's really, really dangerous and unhealthy as well, because then again, all that you're doing is just postponing that confrontation so that when it eventually comes around, and it will, in every instance, it's 10 times worse than what it would have been had you just faced that confrontation to begin with. But we see it across all seasons, all relationships. It's not something that Lorelai and Rory ever do well.
Right? I'm beginning to notice a bit of a pattern
No,
with
really?
them. It keeps happening. But yeah, that's a really great metaphor, is the landmine, this like little buried thing that can, really blow up when you step on it, literally. And Lorelai finds that out all too clearly at the wedding, like the vow renewal in season 5. And yeah, but that leads me to the last topic of discussion for this particular episode. Partings. Was Lorelai running to Chris after her ultimatum to Luke cheating on Luke?
Yes.
Oh, here's the first time we really disagree here.
Mm-hmm. I knew we were going to. But I'm going to let you go off first, and then I will show you why you're wrong.
Okay. I say that it's not cheating because, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it only takes one person to end a relationship. And Lorelai was very clear in this ultimatum that Luke's refusal to solidify their commitment and to actually follow through with what he said he was going to do will sever their relationship. She draws a line in the sand. And when she walks away from him after that, she says, I have to go, like that. It's implicit in the conversation of like, it's now or never. And so the expectation of exclusivity and monogamy after that point is not there. She chose not to renew. She had it with the emotional neglect and the compartmentalization of their lives. She wanted to be with him fully. And he said no, that he couldn't do that he wasn't ready to do that for whatever reason. And, we know why. We know that he has a hard time processing his emotions. So I think that her clarity in that moment makes it not cheating. However, it was still a dumbass idea because it was done in an effort to sever that relationship so fully that they would struggle to repair it. It was her exit strategy. It was her seeking comfort on a most base level with the absolute worst person that she could. And it was still hurtful to Luke. It was a dick move to go to the guy that arouses Luke's jealousy. Like, this is the worst person that she could possibly have gone to. The worst thing she could have done to Luke. And, you said it yourself. Like, Luke is entitled to feel hurt by this. And, it was not a good idea, and it was hurtful. It was a betrayal of sorts. But I don't think it was cheating, because when she made it clear what her terms were, she altered the nature of their relationship and of the sort of contract, if you will, that they had with each other in that moment. She was making a break, and it was clear. And so Luke's entitled to be upset by it, but it's not cheating in my books.
Right. First off, I do and I don't take stock with the ultimatum, because I get where Lorelai was coming from, where she was just at a point of such frustration with the relationship and, like you said, wanting to be with him, where she's like, I've got to do something about it. But the ultimatum kind of also felt like you're really trying to force his hand in a way that Luke Danes is not going to be receptive to. He's not going to, do well with that pressure. That's just not who he is, because again, this is a man that is just still really growing and trying to be better at coming to terms with his own emotions and how he is going to process things and how he's going to feel. It takes him time. He's not just like the man that can flip a switch and just be so in tune with himself that he knows what is going on. So when Lorelai gives him this ultimatum and says, it's now or never, and he says, I just can't give you that right now. Emphasis on that, like, that's not where I'm at right now in this relationship. But I'm not ready to call it quits. It's just, I can't meet you where you're at right now. And Lorelai's response is, okay, well then, I'm going to go away. She has a right to do it.
Yeah.
But she needs to recognize that just because Luke is saying not right now, he's not throwing in the towel. You are, I guess, right now, but he's not. So because there's that really lack of transparency there in that gray area where one person's done, another person is not, like, it's so hard to say, but I would still say no, there needed to be a bit more closure there, and for her to really just pin that down with Luke and get him to either say, no, it's not right now, but I still want to make this work, or no, it's not right now, and I respect the fact that we're done. But there wasn't just the closure that I think we should have seen there, or that would have needed to have been seen for me to just, agree with you fully on this point. But I do understand, and you make excellent points as well. They're not unnoticed.
I think as humans, we are pretty obsessed with closure. We talked about this with the Max Medina stuff and how we were unfulfilled by the fact that we didn't understand how that relationship ultimately ended. And Max talks about it when he comes back in season 3. It's not about closure. Has every relationship I've ever been in had closure? No. Was it emotionally devastating to me? Yes. But that doesn't change the ultimate nature of the relationship. It is over whether I want it to be or not. And so Lorelai had been putting up with Luke's emotional distancing and like keeping things from her, keeping her out of April's life and vice versa for so long that she was starting to doubt his ability to ever fully integrate her into his life. And she's not wrong about that. If they're going to be legally married life partners, they need to include each other on stuff. And Luke doesn't get to set the ultimate pace of everything. She knows this about him. She knows that he's slow to process these emotions. But if that's the case, and he's unable to provide what she needs in this relationship, if he's unable to meet her at her level, that is a fundamental problem with the relationship. And so I understand why she felt she had to leave it at that moment. And so just because she knows these things about Luke doesn't mean that they're not true and that they're not impacting her emotionally. And it doesn't mean that it's not the right thing for her to leave that. I think plenty of people have been in that scenario and would say that that's the right call to make. I mean, obviously we know they get back together, which I have feelings on their ultimate relationship that we'll get to at a further date. But I think when it comes to being really precise about relationships and being very aware of what's happening and where these lines are and what the nature of engagement is with these concepts, what matters most when defining cheating, when talking about this like massive breach of relationship trust, it comes down to, are you in a relationship where there is a mutual understanding of exclusivity and involvement in each other's lives in that way? And the minute Lorelai walked away, she severed that. She ended it. She broke it off, at which point it's her prerogative to continue doing whatever she wants. She doesn't have to wait for Luke to catch up to her because he may never catch up to her. She's not stuck waiting for him. That was the whole problem in their relationship that caused that fracture in the first place. I was like, what's that word? Fracture in the first place. And so I think on a technical level, if we're getting semantic and pedantic here, it's not cheating because she ended the relationship first for good reasons.
Right. But then, like, I can't also ignore the regret and the hesitation that she has when she eventually comes back and it's just like, I slept with Christopher. Like, the hesitation there in knowing how much pain it's going to cause Luke at that moment in time, I think not just stems from the fact that, like, yeah, I'm about to cause Luke pain, but I'm about to cause Luke pain because I innately know that he probably didn't think that this was over, even though in my book it was, and I will validate that point. Like, I will not discredit Lorelai there. She thought it was done. She moved on. She made a choice to be with Christopher. But she innately knew in that moment that that was not how Luke saw it. And because there was, again, that breakdown of communication, the gray area of her knowing that Luke didn't see this as being done, and now I have to confront him. Rare moment for one of our Gilmore women to just own up to the fact that, like, hey, I slept with Christopher, but I'm scared to tell you this because I know it's going to hurt you, but also because you probably thought that that was not going to be a reality because this was still able to be fixed in some regard or not yet completely over. I think she knew that he was not on the same wavelength of having, you know, put a pin in it. And so I've gotta, that's where I would say, like, there's just some gray area there where I would lead to it just being like, in Luke's mind, you cheated. And that needs to be
doesn't
acknowledged.
matter, though. That does not matter. He's allowed to be hurt. He's allowed to hold space for the disappointment and the lack of respect or the particular wound caused by the fact that she went to Christopher. But she was clear. They don't have to be on the same wavelength about the relationship ending. If she ends it, that's it. It's over, whether he wants it to be or not. She's a grown woman who can make her own decisions. She knows that it's going to impact him, and she knows that Christopher in particular is going to be a sore spot for Luke. That's the dick move. Doesn't mean it's like a good thing for her to have done, but it doesn't make it cheating.
Mm-hmm. I hope anyone who's watching this is just weighing in right now. Like,
yes, please leave us your comments.
Oh my gosh, we need your spicy hot takes for all of this. Like, and I will say, just I have to say, like, I love when we disagree. Like, I love when we agree, but I also love when we disagree because it just allows us, I think, to have some really amazing conversations about this show. So I'll fight you more on it, I'm sure, in future episodes down the line. But yeah. It's just fun.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, it is really difficult for Luke. I have another yeah, because I get like worked up. It's fun, but I have another Esther Perell quote on the topic of the whole, like, Luke's reaction to it. The revelation. Okay, in this case, it's not an affair because of the reasons I already mentioned, but the revelation is eviscerating. If you really want to gut a relationship, to tear out the very heart of it, infidelity is a sure bet. It is a betrayal on so many levels: deceit, abandonment, rejection, humiliation, all the things love promised to protect us from. So in this case, like I said, it's not, in my books, an affair, but it's a betrayal. It was hidden from him. Luke feels abandoned, he feels rejected, and he is particularly humiliated that she chose to go to Chris. And this is why he impulsively reacts and goes to Chris and punches him. Oh, another good quote. Often, impulsive reactions to news of an affair, while meant to be protective, can destroy years of positive marital capital in an instant. And so I think there was, again, not an affair, but the impulsive reaction on both of their parts. You know, she was impulsive to go to Chris in the first place, and he acted impulsively when he heard that she had gone to him, and it destroyed the relationship capital that they had built. And it's why it took them a year to get back together after all of that happened, despite, you know, the hurt and the care that they obviously still showed for each other. But yeah, revenge can in fact keep the unpleasantness of an offense alive. The exaltation of self-righteousness is a shallow pleasure that traps us in an obsession with the past. So I just thought those quotes reminded me of the Luke and Lorelai situation. Even though it's not cheating, it still impacts Luke in a way that is similar to it, because Lorelai choosing to go to Chris is a betrayal of its own nature. But by that point, Lorelai had definitively ended their relationship, whether Luke liked that or not, whether he came to her with his truck packed for Maryland or not. She had made up her mind. She says it to Suki in the kitchen at the Dragonfly. It's over. It has to be over. It's like I'm attached to the back of his truck and he's just dragging me along. She's perfectly entitled to protect her own well-being and to get out of that situation and to say no more. Like, no matter how much I love you, this is not working and you're not allowed to treat me like this. It's over. And so in my books, she had cut the tie before she slept with Christopher. So it's a betrayal, but it's not cheating. They're two separate things. They can like coincide with each other, but they are definitionally different.
Mm-hmm. I'll fight you more on it one of these days.
One of these days. But I've got one last like final thought to cap off this episode, and that's the fact that like Lorelai in general keeps things so close to her vest. And I think it's part of her relationship dynamic to keep secrets. When I was watching The Nanny and the Professor for the Paris and Asher stuff, I was reminded of Lorelai's relationship with Jason being so secretive. And it made me think that it's part of what keeps Lorelai's relationships alive, so to say, in the sense that like they don't get to a place of mundane drudgery because she keeps people at an arm's length and she doesn't tell her parents about them. And so it's almost like the relationship is only real for the two of them, and maybe for Rory if she knows. But she was so concerned with her freedom and her autonomy from her parents. They're so important to her that she ignores the side of her that desires security and commitment as represented by another and a secure relationship that is socially known and sanctioned. And part of the reason her relationships never get off the ground until Luke, which is sort of ironic because he's one of the most stable people in the show, and kind of goes against the idea of adventure and secrets, is that she's keeping these things from other people. She's allowed to live in this secret world where like nobody gets to come in, and that's thrilling for her. That's how she likes to operate. It's like keeping people out of her relationships and keeping secrets is kind of her way of keeping the thrill and the magic and the spark alive, if you will. It almost feels like every time her relationships get to a place where they're out in the open, boom, like it's no longer fun for her. You know, we see it with Max, where it's like once everybody finds out about it, they're just like, maybe we should take a break from this. Like now that this is too real, we can't handle it. I mean, Max was part of that too. He was part of that decision. But, you know, after that, they start seeing each other again in secret. And suddenly it's not just secretive phone calls, but it moves into reality where they're talking about merging their lives and cohabiting and getting married and all of these things. And that's really when Lorelai starts to struggle. You know, before it was all like romance and thrills and secrets and excitement. But then once the reality of that lifestyle becomes apparent to her, that's when she's like, ooh, we're not actually a good fit, are we? It was fun when it was naughty and when it was hidden from the headmaster and her family and sometimes even Rory. But then once they were engaged and it was like going to be this real thing that was sanctioned by others, it was no longer fun. And I think Luke, in his own way, is also transgressive. So even though they're dating out in the open, he's so against what her parents want that like a huge part of his attraction for her is the fact that her parents don't like him. It has to like she needs to go against them to have like these desires. It's sort of like whatever they hate, she loves, and that's what keeps the drama and the magic alive for her.
Mm-hmm. Just gonna wave it.
Rightly so. Like, I mean, I never said this was healthy. I just said it was something I noticed.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously Lorelai does this because, you know, if I can piss off Emily and Richard and keep secrets from them, like, it's just, you know, riveting for her. But that doesn't mean that your relationships, like you said, are ones that are, you know, built on compatibility and trust and genuine love and care. It's just because, like, ooh, this will, really put a thorn in Emily and Richard's side, and I'm here for it. That's also not fair to your partner either. Like, it's just doing them a disservice because you're stringing them along into a relationship that is probably not going to last, nor should it if it's that level of unhealthy, and you're using that person in that way just to, again, piss off Emily and Richard. So it makes perfect sense that when these, come to light and it's like, oh, well, that's actually not fun anymore. And now what I'm realizing, like, there's no compatibility there. And but it shouldn't take that for Lorelai to realize it, because again, just super unhealthy across the board. And it just leads to your partners then just being used. And that's really not okay either.
Yeah. It's her way of playing with taboos, essentially, like dating her daughter's teacher and dating the guy her parents don't like, rebelling, hiding things. It's all fairly juvenile, but I don't know. I just sort of picked up on it as I was thinking about stuff for this episode in context of, why secret relationships are so exciting. And I was like, oh my God, Lorelai just has nothing but secret relationships. So yeah, anyway, that kind of wraps us up for this one. Thanks for sticking around. We hope you liked it. Definitely leave us your thoughts in the comments, because we can't seem to come to any treaty or peace agreement here. So help us out. Take your vote down below. Make your voice heard. And while you're at it, if you could do all those other delightful YouTube things, like, subscribe, share, we would just be ever so grateful. It's always nice to see that you guys are liking what we're doing. And so if you like it, let us know.
Yeah, we always do really appreciate that support. Come back and join us next week for part 3 of cheating as we continue down this road. This is going to be a 4-part series, so we are only halfway done. Other than that, also in the works is an interview with Stan Zimmerman. If you are unfamiliar with that name, he is a writer for was a writer for Gilmore Girls, has also written on countless other television shows like Roseanne and The Golden Girls. So that interview will be released in the coming weeks. Just stay tuned for more details on that as well.
Yeah, so excited to talk to Stan this weekend. That's going to be fun. And Laura, is there something else on the horizon, maybe happening in October somewhere in this like state no one's ever heard of called Connecticut?
Yeah, I've been hearing, like, a little bird told me something's going down in Guilford. In case you don't know, there is the most epic GG weekend that is coming this fall in Guilford, Connecticut. It has taken place for numerous years. Last year it was in Algonquin, Maine. We will be going back, and if you are a GG fan, this is the weekend for you. You have the opportunity to meet cast and crew, just really establish some amazing new friendships within the GG fandom, and these people are like lovely human beings. You will not meet any kinder souls, I promise you that. So if you're interested in that, we will have a link to that website below. It's the FanFest Society hosting the Firelight event. Go check it out. Consider buying a ticket to this event. It is worth your while, we promise. And if you have any questions about it, drop us an email or even a comment on this video, and we'll be happy to just tell you more about what that weekend is like and why you should go.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I'm already so excited to get back to New England. So, and the more people who buy tickets, the more cast and crew they can bring. So keep that in mind. If you're looking at the list and you're like, oh, it's not that many people, remember that more people get announced as we get closer and the more people come. So stay tuned for more info on that, and come back next week. We're going to be talking more about Rory's earlier forays into infidelity, like when she kisses Jess at Suki's wedding and when she sleeps with Dean. So that one's going to be spoilers. I mean, again, blanket spoiler warning from the beginning. Still counts here. So yeah, that one's definitely going to be like, now we're getting to the heart of stuff. These other ones are like, they're still interesting questions, but like, there's a lot of meat in that. And then part 4 is going to be Rory and Logan. So stay tuned for the next 2 weeks for the remainder of this series. But on that note, thanks for joining us. We hope to see you again next week for dinner.
Take care, everybody.
Arrivederci.